Hi, this is Tara Farrader-Smith, and today we are talking about comprehending complexity, enhancing reading comprehension skills for grades 3 through 8. You will find the handouts for this session in the Padlet. So you may want to print this and fill in the blanks as you go. Our essential question today is, how can explicit and multi-strategic reading comprehension instruction enhance students' ability to understand and analyze text in grades 3 through 8 at the sentence level? The theme for this symposium has been to really be actively engaging students through connect strategies. So you'll notice that on each slide, I've made a point to screenshot the connect strategy that is being modeled or used in that activity. Our learning target today is that participants will be able to apply research-based, multi-strategic reading comprehension instruction at the sentence level that helps students effectively engage with and analyze text across various subjects. Our first success criteria is, I can describe the impact of research-based comprehension strategies on student learning. So let's talk a little bit about the reading brain. There are 3 parts of the reading brain that are important, and that is the part that allows for us to differentiate and hear sounds, to be able to memorize and understand and learn letters to build fluency, and to be able to understand meaning. So that's through vocabulary and comprehension. Today, we're really going to be focusing on the comprehension section. Within this whole symposium, there is a lot about vocabulary and comprehension. It's really where our focus is for all of the sessions in this symposium. So that being said, if we think about the reading rope, Scarborough's reading rope, we're really thinking about the upper part of this rope, the first half, which is language comprehension. And within this session today, we're really going to dive into language structure with an emphasis on syntax. You can go and watch some of the other sessions on morphology and vocabulary instruction, and that's going to dive into the semantics part of language structure. But within this session, we're focusing more on syntax. So what is syntax? Syntax is the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences in language. So this is where we think about word order, the rules that tell which word goes where in a sentence, and subject, verb, object sequencing. So in my session, I may have had everybody read this aloud with me, which is that choral response connect strategy. Having all students respond allows you to see who's with you and who's not. So let's do a quick think, write, pair, share. You may need to pause while you answer this. When you are reading a text and you realize you are not understanding what it is saying, what strategies do you use to understand better? Go ahead and pause and take a moment to reflect on this question. If you have somebody viewing this along with you, I would encourage you to also share your answers with each other. Hopefully you said some things like you use fix-it strategies. Good readers go back and reread what they've read. They use syntax clues, so the words around the word that they're not understanding or the part they're not understanding to try to figure it out. They may even connect to some of the diagrams or pictures within the text to help them make sense of what they're reading. But really, we go back, we reread, and we use those strategies that just come naturally to us as good readers. Students don't always understand that, so they have to be taught how to think about their own thinking, which we call metacognition. So that brings us to our second success criteria. I can teach comprehension strategies at the sentence level explicitly, assuming no prior student knowledge. When skilled readers come to text, they access meaning of the words they hear or read, and at the sentence level, the comprehender needs to work out the syntactic structure and sense of each sentence. Go ahead and reread that yourself. the syntactic structure. So we talked earlier about syntax being the word order. So we need to start thinking about building a meaning of progression. So we have building blocks that make up sentences. And it's really important for students to understand how do each of the building blocks of a sentence contribute to the overall meaning of the text. Um, this book by Nancy Hennessy, The Reading Comprehension Blueprint, has a whole chapter just on the blueprint for syntax and sentence comprehension. So if we go back to this slide, we want to help students understand the parts of speech of a word and their jobs. So that's going all the way down to the word level. Then we want to dig into phrases and clauses and sentence types and what their jobs are. When students are able to break sentences down by words and word parts, it's a lot easier for them to understand the gist of the text. And so what Hennessy says is the sentence-attuned educator understands the contributions of parts of speech, phrases, clauses, and different types of sentences to the overall meaning of the text, and, of course, understands connections to effective approaches to instruction. So what might this look like? So if we want to break it down further, this is the building blocks of sentences. So we start at that word level, parts of speech, and we're going to look at that a little bit more closely in a moment. Then we can look at our phrases. Is it a noun phrase or a verb phrase? Or is it a prepositional phrase? How about clauses? Do we have dependent or independent clauses within a sentence? And when we put all of these words, phrases, and clauses together, we get different types of sentences, from simple sentences all the way down to compound complex sentences. So a strategy we might use is to ask open-ended questions to gain meaning. So this is where we have our who, what, and how type questions. So let's think about this in terms of the parts of speech of a word. Here are some of the questions you might ask based on the parts of speech. If you're asking students to find a noun, you might ask who or what. Pronoun, you're going to do the who or what, but you might add whose. A verb, either an action verb or a being verb, we are going to be asking is or was doing. And adjectives, we might ask which one, how many, what kind. If we're talking about adverbs, we might ask when, where, how, why. Prepositions, what is the relationship between the words before and after? And conjunctions, what is connected or needs to be glued together? One of the things that I know students struggle with sometimes is finding those state of being verbs. Action verbs are pretty easy to find, but this is one thing my fifth grade teacher did for me to help me remember that these state of being verbs are a really important part of a sentence. And here is the poem and how she said it to us. And this was done on an anchor chart up on the wall, and we practice this daily. And here it is many, many years later, and I'm still able to remember this little ditty. Be, am, is, are, was, were, been, can, could, should, shall, will, would, have, has, had, may, might, must, do, does, did, done. So having this as an anchor chart and just helping students understand these are action verbs. I'm sorry, these are state of being verbs. This isn't all of them, of course, but it still gives us a good understanding that there are words like these that we will want to look for that act as verbs in sentences. So an example of a being verb would be, tea was a popular drink in the colonies, just as it was in Great Britain. So here we have the word was acting as a verb in both parts of this. All right, then we can also ask questions about phrase types, clause types, and sentence types. Phrases and clauses are important to understand. Phrase is a cluster of words that work together but are not a complete sentence by themselves. So a verb phrase might be wandered along, and a noun phrase might be the vagabond. Wandered is a verb and vagabond is a noun. So those are two different phrases. A clause is a cluster of words that work together and contain both a who and a what. So the vagabond is the who and the wandered along. Wandered is the what. So A clause can stand on its own as its own simple sentence. The vagabond wandered along could be a sentence by itself because it has both the who and the what. So we then start putting clauses and phrases together. So we have simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. This takes a lot of practice as we dig into these with students together. But what we need to remember is that when we have text that has complex sentences, we really do need to help students unpack those and figure out meaning. So we must support students with understanding more complex sentences for them to successfully understand what they are reading. Supporting the understanding of complex sentences through questioning helps when we know what we are looking for. So here's three big components of reading that offer students different challenges. So when there's anaphora, which means that the sentences use pronouns referring back to previously mentioned nouns, students start to struggle. They get lost in all the he, she's, they's, right? So in this sentence, Mark told his sister that he would be late. She was not pleased. So Mark told his sister, so his is referring back to Mark, that he would be late. That refers back to Mark. And she was not pleased. She is meaning the sister. So breaking these down and talking about what each of these pronouns is referring back to can help students unpack those sentences and understand them better. Another challenge that students come across is when we have connectives that are putting together multiple complex sentences, right? So are there words linking thoughts or ideas together that affect the meaning? In the end, the Americans won the Revolutionary War and the British soldiers went back to England. So when we see that linking word and in there, we may need to talk about what's happening in the first part of the sentence and then what's happening in the second part of the sentence, especially if it holds a lot of meaning for our big questions within the text that we're reading. And then, of course, some students really struggle with inferencing. So when inferencing is required, it's important that we go back and gap fill those inferences for students. Is there implied information that requires inferences to understand the context or actions? Laura put on her helmet, grabbed her gloves, and went outside with a smile. So we may infer in this sentence that it's cold outside because Laura grabbed her gloves. She's riding something like a bike or maybe a scooter or a motorcycle because she wore a helmet to protect her head. And despite it being cold out, she's happy about where she's going because she went out with a smile. So there's different things we might infer and just looking at this one simple sentence. All right, so let's practice this. Read this sentence aloud with me. Lily was having a slumber party at her house, and because I was her brand new, very best friend, she and I were supposed to share the plaid pull-out sofa, while all the girls slept on the floor around us in their sleeping bags. This is a complex sentence. There's a lot going on in this sentence. So the first thing I'm asking, is there an anaphora going on? And absolutely, we have some pronouns that refer back to different parts of the word. So whose house is a sleepover at? It's at Lily's house. Who is her referring to? Yes, her is referring to Lily. Who is she referring to? If you're rereading the sentence to make sure it makes sense, that's what good readers do, and that's what we want to encourage students to do, correct? She is also referring back to Lily. Why did some girls stay on the floor and some on the pull-out couch? Only her best friend got to sleep on the sofa with her, and the others had to sleep on the, you got it, floor. So going back and highlighting those parts of the sentence and helping students understand this complex sentence is going to help them understand the rest of the text. And who is there in this sentence? It is the girls who are sleeping on the floor. The other girls are not her best friend. So when we ask questions such as this, and most of the class is able to answer them, then we need to think about differentiating our support, right? So we want to do this, and then we carefully start to scaffold away the supports for more complex sentences. At the beginning of the year, or with a particularly complex text, you may have to scaffold that questioning, that support back in for specific sentences, especially if they are an important part of really understanding the gist of the overall text. And you may find that the majority of the class begins to do more of that metacognition and thinking about their thinking within their heads. So then we might have to move our support to a small group time. So this is a great thing to do. Rereading text in our WIN groups or our intervention groups with those students who are still struggling, and really providing them the think alouds and the support by sharing your own thinking with more complex sentences within a text. So it's a really great graphic that I just like to share. We have a handout that goes along with this, just for different ways to scaffold. And you're going to hear some of these same things using pictures and realia and student-friendly definitions and sentence frames, explicit instruction, graphic organizers throughout the different sessions in this symposium. But this might be one graphic that I would print and put in a page protector or laminate and have handy near where I am planning lessons to remind me to use these great strategies. All right, moving into our third success criteria, I can practice and employ multiple comprehension strategies effectively at the sentence level in my teaching. So if we take this text from a fourth grade CKLA text, Trouble is Brewing, we are talking about the Boston Tea Party here, although it never is referred to as a Boston Tea Party within this text itself. We know from our own background knowledge that that is where it comes from, and it will come up within the text. It's just not referred to in this text. But the big question in this is, who were the Sons of Liberty, and what form of protest did they lead in the Boston Harbor? This is our purpose for reading. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set a purpose for reading. Then I would have all of you read this text. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud since you may not have it in front of you right now. Some of the most passionate protests against the Stamp Act took place in Boston, Massachusetts. There, angry crowds took their frustration out on tax collectors. A new group of protesters formed in Boston in response to the Stamp Act. The group met under a tree they called the Liberty Tree. They made public speeches against taxes and the British government. They cried, "No taxation without representation." This group became known as the Sons of Liberty. Well, I know that my big question asked about the Sons of Liberty up here. So now I'm going to probably go back and spend a little more time on this paragraph and some of the sentences within that paragraph, because my big question is answered right there. So I'm going to read the rest of the text. We're not going to right now, but I would continue to read the rest of the text. And then I would come back and I would pull out those sentences. Remember, we're looking for anaphora, we're looking for connectives, we're looking for inferences that have to take place, or information that students may need to understand more in depth because they have to make an inference. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, who were they in this sentence? They made speeches against the British government and they cried, "No taxation without representation." They refers back refer back to the group of protesters. So you can see in this instance, these 4 sentences really are important to understanding the gist of the text, which we set that purpose for at the beginning through our big question. So we didn't just pull out 1 sentence in this instance, but we pulled out 4, and they is referring back to those group of protesters within a different sentence, right? So sometimes it can all be in 1 sentence, but sometimes we have to pull out a couple of sentences. And when we know which are our most important sentences in a text that we're reading, because we have set a good purpose for the text, then we can be really intentional about bringing students back to the most vital part of our sentence. So what does no taxation without representation mean? A lot of students know this phrase because it's just something that we see a lot of and we hear a lot of, but a lot of students don't understand what it actually means. When we think about no taxation without representation, what this means, and I'm going to give students this information just right up front, because I know many are not going to be able to get this inference without giving them that information. So um, the British government was taxing the colonies for lots of different products, and they were not getting a say in what was being taxed and what was not being taxed, because there was nobody from the colonies on the board, the governing board, that made those decisions. So they don't have representation. So they don't feel like it's fair for them to have products taxed when they don't have somebody there representing their voice and saying, this is okay to tax or this is not okay to tax. So no taxation without representation is the chant that was often said during the Revolutionary War and during this time. So this group became known as what? The Sons of Liberty. So this group of protesters who did not like being taxed without having a say on those things that could be taxed became known as what, everybody? Yes, the Sons of Liberty. And that is our big question. So we would go back to our big question and say, this is who our Sons of Liberty are. And they become a big part of forming a government within the United States. All right, another strategy we might use is to ask open-ended questions to gain meaning. So we talked earlier about maybe digging into the parts of speech and their job. So Parliament eliminated the tax on paper products, but in 1767, it replaced it with other taxes. So if we wanted students to break this down and really look at the parts of speech of this sentence, one of the things we might do is use a beach ball. I have a beach ball here to show you. The colors on this one might be a little bit different than the one that I have, but I might put in a pocket chart the parts of speech and the questions that go along with the parts of speech. So who or what would be our noun, who, what, or whose would be pronouns, is or what doing is verbs, and so on. So I might have these up on the board, or I might have them in a pocket chart, and we would toss the beach ball around, and wherever the right thumb landed, that student would be responsible for coming up and highlighting that part of speech and then talking about what it means within the sentence. So when you're done, you might have a nice, colorful, highlighted sentence on your whiteboard. And then it allows you to talk about all of the different parts of speech and what their job is in this sentence. So this is a lot more engaging and allows everybody to be a part of good discussion and conversation rather than having students do a whole bunch of worksheets around finding the different parts of speech. Oftentimes when students do the worksheets, they're not really internalizing what it means, where this would allow for good discussion and students would really understand those parts of speech. Another strategy you might use are scrambled sentence summary, what details can you add from the text? So we want students to be able to place in these boxes the who or what, is or was doing, whom or what, where, and when. So my word bank would be this bank of words. Go ahead and take a second. You can pause if you'd like. And colonists refused to buy British tea in Boston in 1767 would be the correct answers. And then what I might do is have students take the text and see if they can expand this to make a more complex sentence. There are lots of words from the text that could be used to add more detail and make this a more expanded, complex sentence with more details and more information from the text. This is a great summary activity, and if you need an extension for some students, that adding the different details is another way to extend that activity. Another strategy might be to use a Socratic seminar. Socratic seminar is a collaborative, in-depth discussion about a specific text. You'd start with guided, open-ended questions that encourage critical thinking, have students read it, having those questions ahead of time, read it and be prepared to come to the Socratic seminar with answers that they can defend by citing text evidence. And students really enjoy this. There's so many great benefits to Socratic seminars, and it's nice to sit in a circle so everybody has the same. There isn't one person that's like leading or in charge. Everybody within the circle, everyone is equal. It helps promote critical thinking, collaborative thinking, because they can jump off of each other's ideas and expand each other's ideas. It helps develop communication skills. Having the information ahead of time and preparing ahead of time builds self-confidence in speaking. And then it also just really helps make personal connections to the text. All right, so our fourth success criteria today is I can reflect on the comprehension strategies I currently use and determine what I can add to my teaching practice to enhance student understanding of text. So we finished this face-to-face session with musical chairs using our notes and a word bank. I had the word bank up on the wall so that participants could know which words need to go into the boxes. And this musical chairs activity is a fun way to have students review notes and just review important information that has been shared. So our word bank was semantics, syntax, verb, noun, simple sentence, anaphora, connective, gap filling inferences, clause, and phrases. So those go into the boxes. I played music every time. I had these papers within sheet protectors and whiteboard markers on the tables, so participants went around and filled this out. And every time I stopped the music, they stopped and just filled it out, whichever one was in front of them. And then we went over it to review everything again at the end. So musical chairs is a fun way to pull information together and review important information from a text. So that was our culminating activity, which was great for extra practice and review, and scaffolds such as anchor charts and pictures support students who have not mastered the skill be able to participate more independently while still having fun and having success. So be thinking about some ways you might want to incorporate musical chairs in your classroom. So we have successfully gone through each of our success criteria today, and our essential question was, how can explicit and multi-strategic reading comprehension instruction enhance students' ability to understand and analyze text in grades 3 through 8 at the sentence level? So I've rephrased that into a statement. And then what I'd like you to do is also think about what are some strategies based on this session that you will try in your classroom. Some of those strategies may include helping students understand the building blocks of sentences and their roles in meaning, ask open-ended questions to gain meaning, scaffolding support for complex sentence by breaking down complex sentences through carefully selected questioning, differentiating support through whole group and small group, Socratic seminars, and engaging students in active review activities such as word scrambles or musical chairs. Go ahead and take a moment to jot down any of these ideas that you plan to use in your class. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Tara Farrader-Smith with Strive TLC, and I hope you have a wonderful summer. Thank you.